They looked like the kind of best friends you see in movies, inside jokes, long drives, matching tattoos. They were inseparable for years. A friendship built on trust, laughter, and shared struggles. If you saw them together, you'd swear they were family. But this story proves that even the people closest to you can have the darkest secrets. It started with something small. A text left unread. A call that went unanswered. At first, no one thought anything of it. Life gets busy. People forget to respond. But then the silence grew longer. Hours turned into days. And one name kept coming up. The best friend. The last person to see them alive. At first, the friend was helpful, cooperative, calm. They posted about the missing person on social media, attended search parties, comforted the victim's family. On the surface, they were devastated. But something felt off. Behind the scenes, detectives were noticing cracks. Security footage showed the two of them leaving a local diner around 9:17 p.m. They walked out together. The victim looked relaxed, smiling, trusting. But what happened after that moment is still hard to believe. The next morning, the victim's car was found parked outside their home, but they were nowhere to be found. The lights were off. Their phone was dead, and their door was left slightly open. Something their family insisted they would never do. When the police interviewed the friend, their story sounded perfect. Too perfect. "I dropped them off at home and left," they said. "We said goodnight. Nothing seemed wrong." But detectives were trained to hear what wasn't being said. They noticed the friend never asked one important question. "Do you think they're okay?" Instead, they said things like, "I'm sure they'll turn up," or "They probably just needed space." The kind of phrases that distance you from responsibility. 3 days later, police obtained a warrant to search the friend's apartment. That's when the illusion shattered. Bloodstains, faint but real, were found in the bathroom. A pair of shoes, recently cleaned, and tucked behind a dresser drawer. The victim's missing phone. It had been wiped clean. But one deleted message was recovered. A voice memo, only 6 seconds long. The victim's voice trembled as they said, "Why are you doing this? Please. You're scaring me." That's when the truth began to surface. It wasn't a robbery. It wasn't a stranger in the night. It was someone they trusted more than anyone. Someone they laughed with, cried with, shared secrets with. And maybe that's exactly why they were killed. Jealousy, control, resentment. It builds in silence, behind smiles, in group selfies, at birthday parties. And sometimes it explodes. The moment the arrest was made, people couldn't believe it. "No way," they said. "Not them. They'd never do something like this." But the evidence was undeniable. And slowly, people began remembering moments. Tiny red flags they had ignored. Like how possessive the friend could be. How they didn't like the victim hanging out with new people. How they always had to know where they were, who they were with, what they were doing. Things that seemed like overprotectiveness suddenly looked like control. In the courtroom, the family sat in disbelief. The person sitting just feet away from them wasn't a stranger. They had shared dinners, holidays, memories. And now, they were hearing how that same person had planned, lied, and murdered. They weren't just dealing with grief. They were dealing with betrayal on the deepest level. This case didn't involve a masked killer or a home invasion. It didn't happen in the dark woods or on an abandoned highway. It happened between two people who knew each other's secrets. And that's what makes it so terrifying. Because if your best friend, the one person you trust more than anyone, can lie to your face and still hug you like nothing's wrong, then how do you ever know who's safe? Pause. Music drops into low, tense hum. In the end, justice was served. The killer was sentenced. But the story lives on. Not just as a tragedy, but as a chilling reminder that not all monsters hide in the dark. Some of them smile in your photos. They say a killer always leaves something behind. A trace, a mistake, a moment of panic that shatters the illusion of control. In this case, it was a voicemail, just 6 seconds long. 6 seconds that turned a best friend into the prime suspect. 6 seconds that exposed the unthinkable. The voice of the victim, barely above a whisper. "Why are you doing this? Please. You're scaring me." And in those words, everything changed. The friend, who once stood side by side with the grieving family, suddenly became the one under the spotlight. The person who hugged them, cried with them, helped search for the body, was the same one who had hidden it. Police now had more than suspicion. They had motive. And soon, they had a confession. Not one made in court, but in pieces. Through deleted texts, strange journal entries, and a search history that would make your stomach drop. It turned out the friendship had been falling apart behind the scenes. There were arguments, obsession, a controlling pattern that the victim had quietly tried to distance themselves from. But when they finally tried to walk away, that's when the friend snapped. Insecurity turned to rage, and rage became murder. The plan wasn't complicated. It was personal, intimate, quiet. No forced entry, no screams heard by neighbors. The killer used the one thing no stranger could ever use: trust. They knew how to get in. They knew what to say. They knew the victim wouldn't run. And they used that trust as a weapon. The body was eventually discovered in a shallow grave just outside town, near a lake they used to visit together in better times. A place full of memories, now forever marked by blood. And when the trial began, the courtroom was packed. People sat in stunned silence as prosecutors revealed every chilling detail. The jealousy, the planning, the cold, calculated actions that followed. The killer showed little emotion. No tears. No breakdown. Just a calm, empty stare. The kind you don't expect from a so-called best friend. Witness after witness took the stand. Old classmates, co-workers, even mutual friends, each telling stories that, in hindsight, were warnings no one saw clearly at the time. The possessiveness, the mood swings, the jokes that felt a little too serious, all those red flags were brushed off. Because who really wants to believe that someone you laugh with, trust, and love is capable of something so evil? The jury didn't take long. Guilty. Life in prison. No parole. No second chances. But justice, no matter how complete, doesn't erase the pain. It doesn't bring back the laughter, the shared memories, the future that was stolen. And that's what makes this case so devastating. It wasn't just a murder. It was a betrayal of everything we believe about friendship. Because if the one person who knew your darkest secrets, your fears, your habits, your daily routine, if that person could turn on you without warning, then what does that say? About anyone? This case leaves us with questions we don't want to ask. Who do you trust? What signs are you ignoring? And what would you do if your best friend became your worst nightmare? Soft music fades. Screen shows photo of the victim with candles in front, a memorial image. Their family still visits that lake, not to grieve, but to remind the world who they were, to tell their story, to keep their memory alive in a world that so easily forgets once the headlines fade. And that's why we tell these stories. Not to scare you, but to wake you up. Because real monsters don't always wear masks. Sometimes, They call you their best friend. Dramatic pause. Then a shift in tone. Calm. Inviting.